Okay, I thought I just pulled that down my front because I was like looking at myself in the webcam. I've been saying I want to start vlogging for ages and not doing it, so finally I thought maybe I would get around to doing the thing, because I have a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, obviously, because I always do. I wanted to start with a coming out video, because although I'm sort of like out in my daily life, I'm still not in some circles, I guess. Oh, she's telling us she's a lesbian. But no, I am not. That is not the thing that is what I am here to do. I am, in fact, not a lesbian. In fact, the word that I use now to identify myself is queer. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that and what that means to me and how I came to use that label as opposed to other labels. I find the word queer really empowering, and it's taken me a long time to get there because it's not that widely used a label. But yeah, I found it to be the word that A, most accurately describes who I am, and B, makes me feel powerful and realised in myself. It's a word that I can use to tell people who I am without feeling shame about it, I suppose. Not that there should be shame associated with any label, it's just that there is shame in telling people something that makes you feel like a phony because it's not quite the right thing. I find queer empowering, but something I'm going to make very clear about using that as a word is that it is a reclaimed slur, which means it is a word that marginalised communities have had used offensively against them in the past and have since chosen to reclaim and make their own and use in a, if not positive, neutral way. So yeah, it's a slur and you should never use it to describe someone without their permission. This is me giving you permission to use it about me. And the reason I choose that over bisexual is because my friend Tash said these very wise words to me that kind of articulated so quickly what I'm sort of actually going to spend a whole video explaining. That it covers who I am, who I fancy, and what I want to do with them. Bisexual, maybe because of the stigma attached to it, I don't know. But as a person who doesn't consider themselves very sexual, it's a bit, I don't know, it doesn't work for me. And that's cool. Like, labels are, they're yours. Like, you're always going to be bigger than a word. You should never label yourself as something that you don't feel like that's a box you fit in. Oh, something else about the word queer. I've heard gay men say that women shouldn't use it because queer is a slur that is used against men. I see where you're coming from, kind of, because visibly queer men have had it weaponized against them for, you know, a long fucking time. Part of the reason that it has been historically less weaponized against women is something that I think is partly due to the denial and lack of recognition of the fact that women can even be queer, and partly this thing called femme invisibility, where if you are like me and you are a woman or present in a relatively feminine way, your identity is in a way erased by that because people very much see you just as a heterosexual lady. Another thing about me coming out that made me really reluctant to do it is because I was so ready for people to turn around and be like, well, I knew it all along. And if you did, and for whatever reason you suspected it, it denies my agency in like defining who I am as a person. And basically, it's just really shit if someone comes out, and that's a big, like, it's a big emotional effort. And they have to, that's a really brave thing to do. Just don't turn around when people have gone to the fucking effort of being like, hey, this is who I really am, and it's important to me that you know that, and you go, oh yeah, of course I did. Thanks for telling me is probably the standard way you should respond. Anyway, so the kind of last thing I wanted to do was to talk about like how I got to the point that I am at now, which is openly identifying as queer I started to realize I possibly was not a heterosexual at about 16. I did still fancy men, and so that was constantly validated. And then there's this thing of like, oh, it's perfectly normal for you to have crushes on women you admire, but that doesn't mean you're queer. I started to think about myself as possibly being bisexual. I never told anyone. That was probably a good thing because I wasn't sure of myself. So identifying as bisexual, I was kind of reluctant to do, and I think because of this stigma of it being an attention-seeking thing, I started having quite a few more male friends and just like hanging out with guys more, and so my like kind of crush interactions with people were with men, and I was like, oh, cool, you're straight. But then like the idea of like sex and intimacy in that sense, this is so TMI, but like whatever, if you're still watching by this point, let's go for it, was like a really terrifying thing to me. I was at a party at someone's house where they had a hot tub, and I was in a hot tub with a load of queer people, and this guy started talking to me about being asexual. What he was talking about was very familiar to me. I guess the dictionary definition is something along the lines of a person lacking sexual attraction. It's a spectrum. People fall at various places along that spectrum. And yeah, so I was at this point where I was like, okay, you like guys, but maybe this is a thing that you are. While I was at uni, I ended up falling for one of my best friends, and being romantically involved with her. And at the time, I thought that was kind of an exception to the rule, and I generally fancied men. But I think looking back on it, it was kind of a bit of a wake-up call that actually, like, you can like more than one gender, and that's okay. You can be happy and fulfilled in that. And it wasn't a great relationship, and I ended it and got hit by a car actually the same day. Not one of my best days. I'm very grateful to her for stuff that I learned, even if we don't particularly like each other anymore. Shit happens. So I got to this point where I was identifying as like asexual, but attracted to multiple genders. I really threw myself into like activism in that sphere, and I think partly that was because of my discomfort and still feeling like the label didn't fit. You're in a really tough situation when you're like, oh, I've never really been sure like what I am, and then you're like, oh, I'm this thing, and then you sort of realize that maybe you're not, but you feel like you've had allegiance to that particular label for so long that you kind of got to stick with it. And the longer you stick with it, the more confusing and horrible it gets. I don't really know when it happened, but eventually I just started being like, hey, you're just queer. Like, you're just a bit funky. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and the easiest way to sum it up is to just pick that word. So I picked that word, and that's good enough for me. Hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully you still like me if you already liked me. Maybe you like me more if you didn't like me. And if you don't like me because I'm queer, then fuck you, basically. I feel like I can't say, like, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe when I don't even know if I'm gonna do vlogging again. Anyway, that's it for now. Catch you later. I regret that immensely. Sorry, my dungarees are doing a thing.